Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University, Professor C. Raj Kumar, Mr. and Mrs. Chokalingam, we have the great honor of having Raj's parents as well, and of course all of you. Thank you for coming. As I said, I have been given the duty, the pleasure of introducing the founding Vice Chancellor, Dr. C. Raj Kumar. If I was actually in the north of Vindhyas, and if you were familiar with the Salman Khan movies, I would have said he's a Dabang Vice Chancellor. But I don't know, this joke may not go very well here. I would have to come out with an equivalent of Mammootty or Mohanlal or something, which I don't know. So it quite remarkable. If you are 30-something, and if you're a Rhodes Scholar, you've done Oxford, and if you've done Harvard, the chances are that you wouldn't go to back of beyond Sonipat, look at an empty piece of land and say that I'm passionate about building a university in India and I will go ahead and do it, which is precisely what this gentleman has done. And really, there was nothing there, and he had to do it from scratch. You've seen some of the visuals which says they started in 2009 with one school, 10 faculty and 100 students, and today we have 8 schools. We have something like 500 faculty and 5,500 students. And more importantly, the quality. It's now been declared an institution of eminence, and it's a world-class university. I spent 37 years in the Foreign Service. I came back to teach now in OP Jindal Global University. Very glad I did. Somewhat embarrassingly to both gentlemen, both of these gentlemen were responsible for my teaching at Jindal as well. Thank you very much. So really, I want you to listen to him. More importantly, I think the one thing that I would say is if there is one thing that is going to make a difference to India, it is education, frankly. And that is one thing that strikes people like me when we travel abroad. It is that the system of education that we have today is simply not enough for the kind of people we have in India. And we keep talking about the demographic dividend. I keep worrying that if we don't have the necessary infrastructure in education, and then it may well become a demographic disaster. So fortunately, we have people like Professor Raj Kumar. I'm now going to let him make the opening remarks for you. But once again, it's my great pleasure to introduce what can only be described as a very, very remarkable man, the founding Vice Chancellor, Professor Raj Kumar.
Thank you, Mohan, for that. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the wonderful, young, and also truly, I would say, wise people of the state of Kerala, in particular the city of Thiruvananthapuram. It is indeed my proud privilege to extend a warm welcome to a very dear friend and a mentor, and somebody who I have grown up being deeply inspired for what he is and what he has done, but also what he is committed to. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, to this audience, and indeed to this evening's program. And before I formally introduce Shashi, yes, of course, a round of applause. I want to quickly introduce the university for some of you who may not be familiar with us. OP Jindal Global University was founded as a part of a philanthropic initiative of our founding benefactor, Mr. Jindal. In the year 1998, I was a student at the University of Oxford. That's when I dreamt about the idea of building this university. Before that, I did my early schooling from Kanyakumari and then in Chennai, and did my undergraduation from Loyola College, Madras, and after which I went to Delhi University where I did my LLB. In 1998, when I was a student at Oxford where I got the Rhodes Scholarship to go and study, I was deeply inspired by what I saw. And this inspiration is part of an imagination where generations of young people who go from India and maybe even other parts of the world, when they go into these institutions, they do have that feeling. And I asked the question to myself that are there universities like this in India? The master of my college, which was University College, which was founded in the year 1249, and we were celebrating our 750th anniversary in the year 1999, said that we are the oldest college in the English-speaking world. And once I asked him, why do you say that? And then he reminded me of something which I had knew. he said that in your country there were institutions long before. And as you know, while the oldest university, Bologna, is nearly 1,000 years old, we had Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi, and Vikramshila long before Oxford and Bologna. Such was the civilizational heritage that India had, and India had contributed towards that. So that gave me a thought, but it was a thought of a graduate student. I didn't know how to go about it. That's when I got 2 more fellowships to go to Harvard. I moved to the US and pursued another master's degree from Harvard Law School. That's when I had the privilege to meet Dr. Tharoor at Harvard Law School when I was a student, and it began a process of inspiration and indeed friendship, which has, of course, stood through the test of time. But what I want to say is that as a student, I dreamt about this, and then, of course, I spent the next several years as a lawyer in New York, and then as an academic in Tokyo and Hong Kong for many years, where I essentially wrote a paper entitled Establishing India's First Global University. With that paper, I got to meet with Mr. Jindal sometime in October 2006 and spent the next 1 year persuading Mr. Jindal to do 3 things. 1, to make a substantial financial commitment. 2nd, to do it in a not-for-profit manner. And 3rd, to let me have the academic freedom and autonomy and independence to build a world-class university in India. By late 2007, Mr. Jindal committed to all of that, and he invited me to move to India in early 2008. January to April 2008, I was trying to understand India myself as I was returning to India after a decade of living and working and studying abroad, and I quickly realized what an impossible country it is. Nothing works. Systems are so beautifully designed to ensure that nobody can really do anything. A relatively mediocre practice of corruption, inefficiency, and nepotism had been elevated into a full-fledged science where nobody can actually do anything. And if you end up trying to do something, then you are obviously criticized, just as Dr. Tharoor is always. So it was a very difficult environment to pretty much try to do anything at all. Of course, I had traveled the distance far too long, quit my job in April 2008 and began the process of institutional building, land acquisition, formulation of curriculum, course structure, program development, faculty recruitment plan, student admissions process, hiring of architects, construction engineers, contractors, and pretty much moving the government of Haryana to pass a legislation to establish the first private university happened during that time. To cut the story short, as late as 27 January 2009, the government of Haryana passed legislation establishing O.P. Jindal Global University as the first private university, and soon after, I was appointed as the first Vice Chancellor of the university. And immediately thereafter, we began the construction of campus, recruitment of faculty, admission of students, and as promised to Mr. Jindal, on 30th September 2009, we began the first academic session of the first school of the university, Jindal Global Law School, with only 100 students and 10 faculty members. We never looked back since then. In 2010, we started the business school. In 2011, the School of International Affairs, which Dr. Shashi Tharoor wrote the first concept note and paper, which culminated in the creation of the School of International Affairs. We started the School of Government and Public Policy, the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, the School of Journalism, and the School of Art and Architecture, and the School of Banking and Finance. Just a few months ago, on 30th September 2019, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. Today, we have moved from 100 students to 5,100 students. We moved from 10 faculty members to over 500 faculty members. Moved from, say, a 50-acre campus to a 100-acre campus, from 100,000 square feet of built-up space to over 2.5 million square feet of built-up space. We have students from across the country and also some of the most outstanding students from the God's own country itself. So we are very, very fortunate to have grown as an institution, but I will close by saying that there are 3 things that have happened to us in the last 1 year that has given us greater opportunity, but also an opportunity to make a significant presence across India. First, we were given the status of an autonomous institution. Only 52 Indian universities have been declared as autonomous institutions by the government of India as a part of a graded autonomy process, whereby those universities which have got the highest NAAC accreditation grade were given the status of an autonomous institution. We were one among them. Only 2 private institutions, the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Petroleum University in Gandhinagar and O.P. Jindal Global University in Sonipat, were given that status by the Ministry of Human Resource Development. The second big thing that happened to us was in July of this year, when we broke into the QS World University Rankings. As you know, QS is one of the most reputed rankings organizations. Last year, we broke into QS Asia and QS BRICS, where in QS Asia, we were ranked the top 400 among 13,000 universities, and in QS BRICS, we were ranked top 300 among the 9,000 universities. But we never thought that we will go beyond that. But just in July this year, the QS World University Rankings were released. They rank among the 32,000 universities, which the UNESCO data shows. They rank only 1,000 universities, and OP Jindal Global University was ranked among the top 750 in the world, and we are the youngest university in India and the youngest university in the entire world to have broken into QS World University Rankings. We are also the only non-STEM, non-medicine, liberal arts, humanities, social sciences university in that rankings as well. That was pretty good enough, but a few weeks later, we also were declared by the government of India as an institution of eminence. Again, we are the only non-STEM, non-medicine university which have been declared as an institution of eminence, which happened just a few months ago. So I want to end by saying that this journey that we have covered so far has been largely because of our benefactors' commitment to academic freedom and autonomy, and of course, his financial resources. Secondly, it is because of the extraordinary trust and faith that the parents and students across India, including the ones who are present here, have deposed on us. And thirdly, it is because of the generosity and the farsightedness of my own personal mentors, and in particular, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who have discussed the idea long before I knew the existence of Mr. Naveen Jindal, the idea of building such a university. We are very, very fortunate that Dr. Shashi Tharoor has accepted our invitation.
There's a particular focus on holistic human development. You train the person and not just the mind. So, for example, I remember in school, we used to have after school hours something called a leadership training service. But the leadership was not about you being the best and the brightest and the strongest. It was about performing social service, going out and helping the unfortunate. And this sort of message that came through from the activities in school were part of the moral and intellectual development of one's qualities and one's leadership, which certainly, in my view, have held me in good stead, and I think must have done the same for all my classmates. The pivotal place that your schooling holds in the development of human character is extremely important. And I would say that what a liberal arts education permits starts in many ways with the liberality of your schooling, the openness of your schooling, its exposure and commitment to society. And then from there, when you go into a college, you end up in very many ways being a better citizen as a result. I had lots of experiences at school which are probably irrelevant for this lecture, which is about a liberal education in the more advanced sense of colleges and universities. But one story that I should tell is when I was at St. Xavier's in Calcutta, I had a talent for writing and was made the editor of the school magazine. While I was the editor and I commissioned and picked the articles and so on, there still was a father, the father prefect as he was called, who would vet what actually got published. So the editor would turn in the stuff, but the school administration still decided what got published. And so when at the age of 14 I had this dramatic flirtation with rationality, and I decided that God did not exist, and what is more, I was going to tell all my schoolmates that, and I wrote an article making that point. Needless to say, it was spiked. Didn't get published. But what was amusing was that after that, a rather brilliant young Jesuit priest, freshly out of his novitiate in the faculty ranks temporarily, was sent to my moral science class to deliver an absolutely brilliant lecture giving the epistemological arguments for the existence of God, which impressed my highly impressionable young mind so much that I promptly abandoned all thoughts of the non-existence of God and have been a believer ever since. But the point was not that. The point was that willingness to engage at the level of ideas, that, that where the student is coming from requires being addressed on its own terms. By the way, this particular priest went on to become one of the best-known theologians of the Catholic faith in India, Father Cyril Debrulais. And when I was talking to people about him, I was proud to discover that if I had been an early guinea pig in the advancement of his ability to persuade people about the strength of theological argument, then I was very happy to have served as that guinea pig. But anyway, somebody like that, quoting Kant and Thomas Aquinas, giving you very striking philosophical, rational arguments, such a person is actually essentially training your mind to engage with the ideas, including critically with the ideas that you may have been seduced by. We don't nearly do enough of that, and certainly that's not a characteristic of the sciences, for example, where things are exactly one way. If you put this chemical and that chemical together, this is the result you get. If you put this switch into that circuit, that's the result you get. There's no either or different ways of looking at it or imagining the future. And so my infatuation, if you like, with the value of a liberal education started already in high school, because that wasn't the way in which I liked to think. I didn't like to think in black and white. I didn't like to think in either or. I wanted to think of both maybe. I wanted to think about situations in which one could think differently about the familiar. And whereas in school, of course, in India, we're all taught to answer the questions, I very early learned to question the answers. And that's something which I found incredibly useful when I got to college and university, and certainly beyond. But let's face it, most of you all, and I'm looking particularly at the parents in the room, are not so easily seduced by this kind of argument. They want utility. They want their children to get specific education in fields that are, quote, respected in society, that will command a good job and ideally a well-paying job. And at the same time, the kinds of arguments that I would make about the importance of intellectual integrity, of advocating educational choices that are influenced by broader ethical and aesthetic concerns, that's much less important to most parents. They are understandably focused more on the practical. And therefore, I do want to address that right away. And there are various levels at which to address it. One certainly, to start with, is that this desire to make education more utilitarian, to link it to the needs of what we hope will once again be a rapidly growing economy in a globalizing world, that argument, that kind of thinking, is something that one has to understand and empathize with, particularly now in a society in which unemployment is at a 46-year high, economic growth is sputtering to a dramatic slowdown, and the country and the society seems to be riven with so much anxiety. In these circumstances, we're going to see some of this increasingly attracting people's minds. Let me say that what education liberally aspires to do, what liberal education aspires to do in particular, to rephrase that, is to equip you for any job that you might get. After all, as I've often pointed out in addressing some of our engineering institutions, we produce 5 lakh engineers a year in India, and 66% of them end up in jobs that don't require an engineering degree. Either because their degree is not relevant to the jobs that are available, or because the quality of the education they've had is not good enough, or simply because they're not needed as engineers. So for parents to constantly shove their kids into engineering is one of the great mysteries for me, because this is really an overpopulated field. I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen today's newspapers about the advertisement in Coimbatore yesterday for 579 sanitary workers' jobs, that is cleaning toilets, sewage systems, latrines, cesspits, and so on. 579 jobs advertised in Coimbatore, 7,000 engineers applied. That's the situation in our country today. So the assumption that you get an engineering degree, you're set for life, good job, good salary, is simply not true. A few years ago, I remember in Kerala, posting a pair of ads I saw side by side in a newspaper. I posted it on Twitter. One ad was for a software programmer. He was being offered, a starting salary of the princely 8,000 rupees a month. And right next to it was a coconut plucker. He was being offered 14,000 rupees a month. So that is where we are. I would not urge people to think that engineering is the passport to some sort of future automatically. Of course, IITs may be a different story, but that's another matter. Now, policymakers, however, are still trying to make liberal arts and humanities education somehow more relevant. And it's almost as if you're reducing liberal arts education to an exercise of producing more effective white-collar workers and clerks, rather than producing deep-rooted thinkers, which is what it should be all about. So the liberal arts get really transformed for insidious purposes. You convert history, for example, into a tool to legitimize a Hindutva version of the past, or you transform political science, or as some would have it, entire political science, into a lesson on chauvinistic nationalism, or you transform an obsolete English literature as communicative global language skills for prospective call center employees. That is a travesty of education. This will not leave any room for the imaginative, the ruminative, the philosophical, the theoretical. There have been scholars I've read who've painted an alarming picture of the 18th century poetry scholar being forced to write grant applications for doctoral projects funded by the Ambanis and the Tatas in order to improve English language skills in their workforce. Professional higher education, of course, is ready for takeoff, but the fear is that it could also destroy the traditional liberal arts. And I would argue that the two can actually go hand in hand instead. Since there's so many young people here, let me digress with another story, a slightly irreverent one. An engineering student, a postgraduate student of engineering, is walking by a pond one day when he hears a frog talk to him. "Pick me up and I will turn into a beautiful princess." "No, kiss me and I will turn into a beautiful princess," says the frog. So the student doesn't quite understand what's going on. He looks everywhere else. Is somebody there? Is a girl hiding behind a tree? Nothing. So he looks, and sure enough, it's this frog in the pond saying, kiss me, and I will turn into a beautiful princess." So the engineering student picks up the frog, looks at it, and it says again to him, kiss me, kiss me. So the engineering student puts a frog in his pocket and continues walking. The frog's cries get more and more plaintive. "Why won't you kiss me? I'll turn into a beautiful princess." And after the frog does this a few times, the engineering student stops, takes the frog out of his pocket and says, "Listen, I'm an engineer. I don't have time for a girlfriend, but a talking frog is cool." And he puts it back in his pocket. So, but no prizes for guessing what a literature graduate might have done in the same situation. So, but that's the self-image of the engineer in India: rational, hardworking, self-disciplined, steady, focused on the results of his work. Parents pray for their smartest kids to become engineers. Any child with better than average marks at school tends to get pushed into that profession, sustained by peer pressure that convinces them there could be no higher aspiration. Engineers consider themselves problem solvers, and when the world seems to present a problem, they look to engineering-type solutions to solve it. But the problem with that, I'm going to be very blunt here, if any engineers in the audience forgive me, the field of engineering predisposes its votaries to absolute and non-negotiable principles, and therefore to fundamentalism. It is a short step from studying the predictable laws of engineering to following an ideology or a creed that also seems to the engineering-trained mind to be infused with immutable laws. So if you think that there's only one way a thing can work, you apply that habit of mind and thought also to your understanding of politics, of human beings, of ideology. Only one thing is right, everyone else is wrong. Only one thing is patriotic, everything else is anti-national. This kind of thinking, unfortunately, is facilitated by a lot of our STEM education. In fact, many students, I'm sure the professors here will confirm this, in those few campuses that oblige science students to do non-science courses, find the students resent it. They will say, why does anyone who wants to be a mechanical engineer or build a bridge or be a cardiologist or write computer program, why should they study subjects like history or literature or economics? Why should you study philosophy, music, art? Why should you study anything that doesn't actually help you train for a job? Why shouldn't you only study computers if all you ever want to do is write programs? If you are suddenly put into a history course and all you really want to do is market automobiles or run turbines, then why should you waste your time? That is very much the attitude of many students. But I would counter it by saying that the reason you need all that is because the human mind is like a parachute. It functions only when it's open. You don't want to jump off a plane with a closed parachute, and you don't want to enter the world with a closed mind. That is the extremely important thing. In fact, I was reading the other day an interview with the former CEO of Walt Disney Corporation, one of the most successful corporate executives in the world, Michael Eisner. And turned out he was an English literature and theater major. And he said, literature is unbelievably helpful because no matter what business you're in, you're dealing with interpersonal relationships. Literature gives you an appreciation, he said, of what makes people tick. So that's one subject, but I'm just giving it as an example that by reading and learning about other peoples and cultures, you get an open and broader mind. And I've been arguing for some time, some of you may or may not have seen my speech on YouTube about this, that the traditional approach in India where we shove facts into the students from school and college onwards, make them memorize stuff which they then regurgitate in the examinations. This was already out of date when it was being inflicted on the likes of me. It's totally out of date for all of you today because in the 21st century world, you don't need a well-filled mind. In the real world, whatever job you do, if you want a fact or an elusive piece of information or the exact quote or a date or whatever, 2 clicks of the mouse and Uncle Google will give it to you. So you don't need a well-filled mind. What you need is a well-formed mind. And the well-formed mind is one that is able to react to unfamiliar information or to discover new information and know how to understand it, how to allow it to fit into a pattern in your own mind, how to understand the problems and dilemmas that information poses, how to approach solutions for it. And a well-formed mind really benefits far more from an appreciation of history or a knowledge of literature or a study of the way in which real human beings behave than the world of certitudes that science technology gives you, because in fact, the diversity of human experience, the variety of ways of thought and action that human beings have is far better captured through the liberal arts than through the certitudes that exist in certain subjects but don't exist in the real world. This is not a world of certitudes. Every single issue is trapped in a web of ambiguity. You need a mind that's capable of understanding that. Now, ignorance and lack of imagination remain the handmaidens of bigotry, of violence. We've seen it. I mean, I think many of us understand that when you see divisive politics in your country, when people seem to be acting out of hatred, out of stereotyping of entire people as the other with a capital O, with the lack of empathy. I think that is probably the most distinguishing characteristic of some of the leaders we have saddled ourselves with. A lack of empathy for their fellow human beings. When you see that, you realize that without extending our imaginations, we'll never be able to understand how people of other religions, other races, other languages can actually and do actually share the same dreams, the same hopes. Without reading widely and broadening our minds, we can't understand the myriad manifestations of the human condition, while at the same time appreciating the universality of human aims and aspirations. Without the liberal arts, it is very difficult to imagine that there is more than one side to a story and more than one answer to a question. So, just to give you quickly a few reasons as to why a liberal arts education is vital for our future and for the future of our democracy. First, and perhaps the most valuable, instead of teaching you what to think, a liberal arts education teaches you how to think. The truth is that Liberal education develops strength of mind, gives you an ordered intellect. The mind is also a muscle, in some ways. The more exercise you give it, the more it'll become stronger, and at the same time, flexible enough to grasp different ideas and to do intellectual work. And of course, it's true that exercising the mind in the liberal arts will actually equip it to deal with all sorts of other subjects. Education itself is about acquiring arts of ability, attention, concentration, following arguments, distinguishing the important from the trivial, grasping new concepts. All of these become much easier when your mind is exercised and enlarged by liberal education. The world also becomes more understandable because a thorough knowledge of a wide range of events, philosophies, realities in different parts of the world, possibilities, actually helps you to deal with life much better because it helps give you a pattern within which the various phenomena of life become more coherent and understandable. No longer will unexpected or strange things be merely dazzling or confusing. How sad it is when you talk about a novel with an engineer friend or whatever, and he says, I have no idea what this is all about, or I can't understand why anyone would do such a thing. That kind of comment shows the limitations of understanding that some of our educational confines restrict people to. Context is crucial for genuine understanding, and a general knowledge of the world through liberal education gives you that context into which you can place new facts that you were to gain and understand. A liberal education also gives you tools to learn permanently. College is meant to provide you with a springboard, not a straitjacket, right? Your real education is not merely that of acquiring the facts in your coursework and your textbooks. It's the skill of learning that you should learn at college. No institution, however great, no faculty, however adept, can teach a student in 3 years or 4 years, whatever you've got on your campus, everything you need to know, either now or in the future. What it can teach you is how to keep learning, how to organize your ideas, to instill in you a lifelong interest in acquiring knowledge. That's what a liberal education does. It's not about saying, here is a professional skill, you study hard, you master it, you go get your job, and that's the end of that. I'm proud to say, as somebody who's had a liberal education, I think I can honestly say in my 63 years, I have not had a single day in which I have not learned something new. It might be a new word, a new idea, a new concept, a new way of looking at things, but if you keep your mind open, there's so much the world can teach you. But you must have a receptive mind for that, and you must have a habits of learning, of organizing the ideas that come your way so you don't just have it confused in your head, of actually learning, keeping on learning faster and more permanently. Knowledge builds upon knowledge. There's no doubt about that. When you learn something, your brain remembers how you learned it. It sets up new pathways, new categories that will make your future learning faster. And the strategies and habits you develop also help you learn more easily. So there's no question. Everything becomes easier the more you know. And what seems very difficult to the young student will actually seem like a piece of cake when you've kept on reading and learning and acquiring more insights and information. That's less true of the sciences. I fear that I'll probably flunk the exams I aced in high school in science today because I've completely lost touch with the science, with the discipline. But it's certainly true of the humanities. And finally, I would say life itself is actually a whole. Life is not divided into subject concentrations. In India in particular, a lot of students have been trained in the art of passing exams. I mean, I'm equally guilty. I'm sure most of the students here have been through this experience. Oh, this question came last year, we don't need to study, they'll never repeat a question, right? True? I can see the students nodding. I can actually tell you a true story of my brother-in-law who became a proudly qualified MBBS, got a doctor's degree, came home for his vacations. And his mother said, I'm so proud of you, my son, the doctor. My knee is hurting. And he looked completely crestfallen and said, Mother, the knee came in last year's exam, so I didn't study it. I'll have to take you to a doctor. Absolutely true story. So the fact is that in life, we really do have to recognize how everything is a whole. there's no question that if you take even a scientific field like psychology, the psychologist who would really want to understand all the mental problems of his patients will have to have a wide enough ranging knowledge to recognize that some problems are biological, some are chemical, some are spiritual, some are merely the product of environment, some may be something as simple as loneliness, of family situations, and so on. The doctor who believes that knowledge of cell biology and pharmacology and diagnosis will be all sufficient in his practice will help very few patients unless he also realizes that more than 80% of the typical Indian doctor's patients need emotional ministration, either in addition to or instead of physical treatment. The doctor who listens, who's educated enough to understand, will be a more successful doctor. A doctor who's read and studied history or literature will be a better doctor than one who has merely read a few extra medical books. But let me just say that in making this case for a liberal education, I don't really want to knock scientific education. It has its own value, and for those interested in it, it certainly can offer, if you go to a good enough institution and do well enough, and it can offer a pathway to a different future. But the truth is that in the globalized world that we live in today, in the diverse democracy that we are and must preserve and protect, you are increasingly likely to be surrounded by others who do not necessarily subscribe to your point of view, to your worldview, may not subscribe to the same sets of beliefs and convictions, or even the same set of cultural practices, culinary preferences, or customs that you affirm. In our own country, we have seen how the rejection of liberal cosmopolitanism has resulted in an increasingly fractured society, where many of those in leadership positions today are unable to look beyond our differences and yet look at our diversity as a problem that must be contained. They have a monolithic view of the country, of their own faith, of their community, and of the way this lot should be run. And yet, even as these leaders seek to insulate themselves in their political community and demand social conformity within our society, there is a strong moral imperative amongst our young that we're seeing in the streets of India today to develop a moral answer, a new leadership for today's times. And I think, though I have done no survey of the crowds in the streets, many of them are liberal arts students, because liberal arts education has prepared them to value these things. I mean, I'm haunted by this video I saw and tweeted a few days ago of that young student in Delhi screaming at the police, "I'm a law student, you've broken into my hostel and beaten me and my classmates." And this young girl is saying, "I'm a law student, tomorrow I have a constitution exam. What have you left of the constitution?" And this anguish comes from a sensibility that understands it's not just about studying for an exam and passing an exam and answering certain questions. It is also about understanding the subject and the values implicit in the subject you're studying for, and the place of that subject in your country, in your worldview, in the meaning that your life has got to have when you finish that exam and enter the real world. So, to my mind, a liberal education will equip you for all that. It'll equip you to be more ready to deal with a national and a global order where multiple realities can coexist, where alternate worldviews and convictions have to be encouraged and negotiated with. Making sense of this world as an experience involves generating a personal engagement and interpretation, and a liberal arts education is key. Without such an education, we cannot see beyond ourselves and our narrow surroundings to the reality of interdependence in all our lives, in our society, and across the world. I do want to argue that in many ways an education for the 21st century has to be a liberal arts education. Today, we need a leadership that's capable of thinking beyond narrow concerns of national security, which you can interpret as freedom from terror and attack, to a broader vision of human security, which also includes freedom from the daily terror of hunger and hopelessness, of a world where everyone has food, clothing, shelter, and where people's creative and entrepreneurial energies are free to express themselves. These young people shouting out for Azadi, they're not talking about secession. There's no country to secede from. It's their country. they want to see free, the freedom that Mahatma Gandhi fought for to obtain for us, the freedom that has been reified in the Constitution Dr. Ambedkar drafted for us. So these ideas, to create a world where all voices are heard, is extremely, extremely important. And I think today what we're seeing with these young people in the streets is a reflection of that famous line of Mahatma Gandhi's, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." They have decided to take their future in their hands and go out there and resist what they consider to be a violation of the principles and tenets that they have been educated to believe are precious in our society. The fact is, the practice of democracy assumes both the habit and the capacity in all citizens to engage with matters that transcend your personal circumstances or your immediate reality. The metaphysics of daily life under modernity are quite a subject because it shares, it obliges every one of us in society to share in the collective anguish and to respond to it in one way or another. Engagement like this cannot be sustained without some sort of liberal education. Reading in the humanities builds bridges between words and meanings at a time when people are trying to break bridges between peoples. It nurtures an interpretive stance from the earlier stage at a time when people are saying there is only one way of doing things. You will not only get more intelligent citizens in our democracy this way, but you'll also be able to usher in more global leaders for a truly global world. Let me stress that the professional, the scientist, the engineer, the doctor, can also gain from exposure to the liberal arts. It will help him or her to tackle the various problems she will face in society and social life, help her become a better citizen, have a better understanding of social values, social pressures, social duties. The engineer who sees every problem as an either-or and every solution as an on-off switch will be a better engineer if they can move beyond these binary views and see the broader context. Machines have been more and more humanized. You've seen these robots. You've seen pictures of Sophie from Japan coming and talking to you. So machines have been humanized, but humans have become more and more mechanized. The trouble with science in many ways is it's improved our circumstances, but it hasn't improved us. It's made a lot of things easier for us, but we as human beings have not improved with technology. We have learned to believe that everything is ordered, everything can be understood, and that's why, as the cliche goes, science is a good servant but a bad master. The whole Frankenstein myth that many of you know is when you create this machine that can do so much, it can also run amok and tyrannize the rest of the world. Unless we temper our scientific knowledge in the forge of human values, which only a liberal education can provide, we run this very serious risk, because science devoid of human values will lead to mistakes. The examples are plenty: weapons of mass destruction, the mindless destruction of ecosystems. All of these are part of the application of science without human values. So the solution, I think, would lie in making it compulsory for every science student, engineering student, medical student to take at least 20% of his courses in the humanities. Then maybe he'll learn to kiss the frog. So I'm going to wrap this up very briefly by saying that in every way, even if you're interested, your parents are interested in you going out and making lots of money, I have a quote from a Stanford University business school professor, Steve Bank, who said that the practice of entrepreneurship is better aligned with an arts curriculum than a traditional business school curriculum. And the fact is that people like, for example, our great scientist, Professor Chandra Ray, said that he actually couldn't go to school for some years. There was some disruption, I think because of the freedom struggle. So he had to stay at home, and staying at home, he was reading books the whole time. And the more he read, he felt the better his mind became, because he was able to draw upon the experience and wisdom of different writers from different fields. And graduates in these areas then inevitably have a wider set of tools available to them in whatever jobs they choose to do, and will enable them to be more innovative and more creative in whatever profession they wish to practice. As Einstein memorably said in a letter he wrote to a Brazilian school, why be a chicken when you can be a lark? And that's something we need to think about. So a nation like ours, a nation that has produced an Aryabhat, has produced a Kalidasa also, a nation that produced a J.C. Bose has also produced a Rabindranath Tagore. As a resurgent nation and civilization in the 21st century, we must value and appreciate both types of creative talents. Just 2 days ago was Ramanuja's birthday, the great mathematician. I'm not in any way diminishing anyone's admiration for the kind of accomplishments of minds like that. But every day, we're also looking at newspaper headlines that show that one has to be. That too is a sensibility that only a liberal arts education can provide. You cannot see the world in black and white because the world doesn't exist in monochrome. It's a world of color. And to navigate this world order, we will need young men and women who are comfortable with multiple realities, multiple belief systems, multiple convictions in our society, and in the face of our differences, appreciate the value of the certain sets of common values, empathy, respect for each other, respect of difference, kindness, intelligence. And I think, frankly, that will require a galaxy of thinkers, writers, historians, poets, artists, musicians, who can navigate the realm of the uncertain and move beyond the artificial borders that have been placed in our country by some of our less imaginative politicians, I would dare say less educated politicians, who have put borders and walls between us, who are creating divisions where none existed or need to exist. The best answer to them is to preserve the diversity that is so essential for our democracy, remains therefore a liberal education. I'll stop there. You want me to take some questions? I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.